controversial, this proposal to vaccinate all teachers in the February half-term break, because if you're going to prioritise healthy people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, you are inevitably going to push down the queue people who might be more at risk, people in their 60s, for instance. How do you justify that?
Well, it's 4 children's commissioners of the different nations of the United Kingdom. It's Sir Simon Stevens, the head of the NHS. It actually includes former education, various other education previous education ministers, the chair of the Education Select Committee, former prime ministers, and various national newspapers have all asked for the same thing that we're calling for.
I understand you have a lot of support, but what is the justification?
Committee on Vaccinations and immunisations to look at the prioritisation. The justification is we all want schools to go back. We want schools to be reopened. We know children are struggling, and we're not asking for for school teachers to jump any queues, but we know that the capacity for vaccination is now expanding as more vaccines come online and as capacity is increasing. We're not asking for any queue jumping.
But there would There would be queue jumping if you do it in half term, because half of the top priority nine-point list would not have been done.
No, that's not what we're asking for. The top 4, which is the highest priorities, we want this to be considered for after that point, and half term comes after that point. We want the Joint Committee on Vaccines and Immunisation to look at this, just as Sir Simon Stevens has done.
Yes, but sorry to jump in, but if you say top 4, then the other 5 categories of vulnerable people will then not get their vaccine before young, fit teachers.
No, that's making the assumption that we have a fixed amount of vaccine, and as we all know, more vaccines have been licensed in recent weeks, more vaccines are coming on stream, and the capacity to produce more and get more out has also increased.
Right, here's my question for you. You only seem to be dealing in your heads with the safety of teachers, and quite rightly, teachers are worried about getting the virus. But how about the issue of transmission from child to child, millions of children going back in, giving the virus to each other and taking it back and potentially infecting their elderly or older relatives at home?
Because vaccine isn't the only part of this. We'll also need the social distancing, we'll need the extra protection, but we know that at the moment there's a massive educational gap opening up, a yawning gap between those children at the better off schools that have been able to keep online learning going throughout, and those at, frankly, a lot of schools in my own constituency who have yet to receive their laptops, whose children are struggling at home working on mobile phones, with parents that are desperate because they can't do their work.
No, we understand all this, and I've got a 9-year-old myself at home and desperate to go back to school, but my issue remains that schools, we keep being told they're safe, but they're shut. The reason they're shut is because we know that kids can transmit the virus and they can take it back to their homes where they have parents, grandparents and so on.
And this is why we need the test, track and trace system to work as well. And we've always argued for this. Schools were actually preparing over the Christmas holidays, if you remember, to do their widespread community testing in schools for school staff and students. We think that it's time to get all of these measures working together. We want the government to come up with a plan and for the Joint Committee on Vaccines and Immunisation to look at the prioritisation, just as Sir Simon Stevens has asked.
Let me ask you this. Do you agree that when Britain opted out of the EU vaccine scheme, it was dumber and dumber?
Well, I think that at the moment what we need to notice is that it's international cooperation between scientists across the world, including our own absolutely brilliant scientists. I'm so proud of the scientists.
Yeah, I know, we're all proud of the scientists. I'm just asking you whether you agree that that decision by Boris Johnson to opt out of the EU vaccine scheme was dumber and dumber.
Well, I don't know what you're quoting from there, and I don't know what you're referring to.
I'm quoting from Catherine West, who is your colleague, the Shadow Minister for Europe, who tweeted in July, UK opts out of EU vaccine scheme, dumber and dumber. I'm just asking you whether you agree with her. She's your colleague.
Well, I don't think that... It's not a particularly helpful discussion line to go down.
It wasn't a particularly helpful thing to say. Well, sorry, with respect, it wasn't a particularly helpful thing for her to tweet, was it? Given it turns out the only dumb person was the person who tweeted it, because it turned out to be an inspired decision by Boris Johnson that has worked fantastically well for this country, led by Kate Bingham and her team. And in fact, had we stayed in the EU vaccine scheme, we probably would have had a fifth of the vaccinations that we've currently managed to do. So when it comes to being dumb, would you not agree that Catherine West was the one who, in the end, turned out to be dumber and dumber?
I don't really think that this, with respect, I don't think that's what people at home are discussing. I think people want their vaccine.
With respect, I think they are all discussing the vaccination programme.
Yes,
and with respect, I would not think it's very respectful of any shadow minister to say dumber and dumber about a government decision that turns out to be inspired without then retracting it and apologising. Would you like to, on behalf of Catherine West, now issue an apology for her being so spectacularly wrong about what she tweeted?
Let's get people vaccinated. That's what we should be concentrating on.
That wasn't my question.
Not what someone tweeted or didn't tweet last summer.
It's your shadow minister colleague. She's the shadow minister for Europe. She said it would be dumber and dumber to take a decision that turned out to be utterly inspired. I simply ask you again, as her colleague, would you like her to retract that statement, or are you happy that that tweet is still up there?
What matters is getting people vaccinated, and that's where we are at the moment.
What matters is you answering my question, isn't it?
You'd acknowledge she was wrong.
Was she wrong or not?
What matters is getting people vaccinated.
You're behaving like a Tory now. Come on, answer the question. Was she wrong or not?
I don't think it's particularly helpful to focus on the tweet of a politician. I'd like to talk about the cladding scandal that's affecting
we're going to come to the cladding scandal. I'm just
people.
wondering whether you think it was right for the Shadow Minister for Europe to say that it was dumber and dumber for the UK to opt out of the EU. If you don't want to answer the question, just say, I don't want to answer the question.
I think everyone should be careful about what they tweet, and what matters is
So she was wrong?
I think it would be unhelpful for people to tweet... Why can't you just say,
you know what, on reflection, she was obviously wrong, and she shouldn't have phrased in such an intemperate manner. I'll just say it. It's what you think, isn't it?
Well, I've not seen the tweet. It's the first time I'm hearing of this. Right,
we've got it for you. We've got it for you. Here we are. Let me remind you. There it is. Still there. Dumber and dumber. Probably one of the best decisions any government's taken in modern times was to do that.
And I don't think that what people are discussing about the vaccine is what somebody tweeted last July. I think what people are discussing about the vaccine is how fantastic our NHS are doing at getting it out there to people.
But of course, the trouble is a lot of people are talking about the fact that even for those who were very pro-EU and were concerned about Brexit, this was one decision that the UK government got right. And I think Piers' point is, when you were critical of opting out of that particular scheme, not you, but a colleague of yours, there is a point where you can just acknowledge, you know what, on this, we got that wrong, or she got that wrong.
We.
And
that was someone's choice.
OK, so that was just an individual...
So she was wrong, your colleague?
I think what people are discussing is when they're going to get the vaccine.
I'm stunned by your knowledge of what everyone in this country is currently discussing. I bet you I could tell you what they're discussing if they're watching this programme. Why won't she just answer the damn question? Why won't she just say what that tweet said?
Because I'd like to talk about leaseholders.
Well, I'm sure you'd like to talk about all sorts of things, but it's
rather than a tweet.
I'm afraid we're not part of your PR department. We don't just roll out the questions that you submit to us to be given to you.
The question.
I simply asked you... The only reason we're still talking about this one thing is because you just won't answer the question.
Just to give you some help, Labour did tell Channel 4 Fact Check it was never Labour policy to oppose the opting out. We have never called for this. So.
Right. So shall we just agree that Catherine West shouldn't have tweeted it and she was wrong? Should we agree on that?
It was never Labour policy. What was tweeted there was not Labour policy.
So she was wrong?
I don't think it's advisable for people to tweet without checking Labour policy, no.
So that's a good point. She was wrong?
I don't think it's advisable for a Labour spokesperson
I know, you just said that. I'm just saying, was she wrong? And in hindsight, should she now delete the tweet?
I honestly really think that people who are wanting the vaccine aren't going over people's tweets.
I know what you think people are talking about. Right now, they're all looking at the TV, screaming, why doesn't she just answer the question honestly? Why doesn't she just say, actually, for a shadow minister for Europe to say dumber and dumber about what turned out to be a brilliant decision was itself dumber and dumber? That's my point.
I think it was an extremely unhelpful comment, yes.
Thank you.
Can we now talk about leaseholders?
We can, because you've finally given a straight, honest answer to a question that I asked you 5 minutes ago.
So let's talk about the cladding scandal. And frankly, it is a scandal. Millions of people still at risk from cladding costs and, of course, living in properties which are currently unsaleable and paying out for waking watches. I mean, I can't imagine what that is like for people living in blocks that are clad in the same or similar materials to Grenfell. What would you like the government to do about it?
What I'd like the government to do about this is set up an independent task force that's got the power to inspect and risk assess those buildings, because at the moment the government doesn't know the extent of the full risk. We think it's about 4.8 million apartments, but we don't know, and we'd like the government to find that out and to assess according to risk. For that task force to have the power to give out funds to remediate that work, to deal with it, because it's not just cladding, it's also things like unsafe fire doors and fire breaks. I'd like that task force to have the power to enforce that, to be able to enforce a hard deadline of June 2022 to make sure that the work has been done on all high-risk buildings. And I'd like the government to go to work on recouping the costs so that neither taxpayer nor leaseholders, and it is important here, there are people's lives at stake, people who are living, people who are watching this programme, who know that they're going to have to go to bed tonight in an unsafe property, faced with bills of £40,000-50,000. We think that burden should be taken off from leaseholders today, and that MPs of all sides should vote with us to make sure that we show people that intention.
Thangham Debonair, I completely agree with you.